Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Crucial Conversations, 5 Critical Concepts to Help You Effectively Discuss What Really Matters Most. I'm your host, Deb Oliver, and on behalf of IIBA, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You know, webinars are one way to continue to hone your skill set as a BA practitioner, but there are also reference resources, such as the Babok Guide, or our member-only online library, which contains hundreds of titles and videos related to business analysis work. At IIBA, we are all about uniting a community of professionals to create better business outcomes. And today is testament to that, with all of you joining us this afternoon to hear more about crucial conversations and getting to that most important information to create those better business results. And with that, I am very pleased to introduce today's presenter, Bob Prentice, or as he is very well known as, Bob the BA. Bob is CBAP certified with over 25 years of experience in managing BA Centers of Excellence. He is a sought-after presenter for keynotes, workshops, seminars, conferences, and training sessions, as well as founding member and past president of IIBA's Minneapolis-St. Paul chapter. Please welcome Bob Prentice.
Awesome. Thank you so very much for that lovely introduction. What a wonderful way to start the day. How is everyone doing? I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're ready to talk about crucial conversations. So this is a presentation that I did in Las Vegas at the BBC conference this last year. We had 450 people packed into the room. It was an awesome experience. And we are well ahead of that today as I'm watching the attendees numbers just keep going up and up and up, which is fantastic. So kudos to everyone that's joined today, because you're smart enough to know. Get out there, get educated, constantly learn, use the resources that the IIBA has given you for your membership. It's so very important. So we have a lot to discuss today in Crucial Conversations. Today I'm going to go through the presentation as is, and then we will save some time at the end for questions that Deb will be collecting along the way, and we'll make sure that everyone gets their questions eventually answered, whether it's online or offline. So let's go ahead and dive in, everyone, and let's get started with Crucial Conversations. So I just want to let everyone know that this presentation is rated PG-13. And what I mean by PG-13 is that frank conversation is really the way to deal with this conversation. So we're going to talk like adults. We're going to have an adult conversation. I'm sure the questions I'm going to get will be difficult, and I'm okay with that. But we need to be frank and realistic, especially in this day and age. Our world is very complex right now. There's a lot of crazy things going on, and there's a lot of people who need crucial conversations. I'm sure we could all agree with that. So we're not going to shy away from that. I need to make sure that everyone goes deep today. And so as you're swimming with the sharks, what this really means is everything I say, everything that we talk about today, I want you to think about what it means to you. I want you to think about what it means to your team, your organization. How do these things apply? What are the things that I can do better? What are the things that maybe I should change? How can I think about this and learn about this and work differently at the end of the day? Because that's really what my model is, to help people think, learn, and work differently. And this is just one more thing to help you do that. So definitely go deep, take lots of notes. I can't give you in 50 minutes all 30 years experience that I have in corporate America and dealing with conversations that are very difficult. So you're going to really have to dig deep and take that away. So if you think about it, and I'm sure everyone's going there politically or otherwise, and I'm not going to go there other than to say that, there's a lot of people who need crucial conversations these days. And this comes down to the people that you work with, the people that you live with, the people that you don't but wish you did. And let's just look at one base example here, Superman and Batman. All right, we'll take it out of the realm, and you can insert any two faces you want. But when you look at it, they have the same essential goals, but they don't get along. They're not communicating. and yet they should be communicating. And this is very typical in your organizations. People will come in and they'll have ideas, and they're fighting for the same reasons and goals, yet they don't communicate. And how you communicate, how you have that conversation to let the other person know is key. And whether you're a Superman or a Batman fan, really up to you. But these two should have had a crucial conversation at the very beginning of the film. Of course, then we wouldn't have needed the film, and we would have just skipped right to Wonder Woman coming this summer. Look at this picture of this family. Now, if it was my family and I had pointed a finger like that, my father would have immediately ran to the garage, picked up a 2x4, and ran into the house. And I'm not kidding. That was his style. He skipped the belt, threatened with a 2x4. He was very stern, very strict. Never used it, but it was always the threat. But at home, and this whole webinar today applies as much as at home as it does at work, it's all about how you respond. So, you know, when you see conflict like this, there's a conversation that needs to be had before things get out of control. Because if things get out of control, then you have to move into, you know, conflict negotiation and management, and it just gets more difficult. So how can we have these conversations before it gets to that point? Plus, you know, the little girl there, she's a Dickens. She's going to play both sides of this. She's totally playing both sides of it. I don't trust her. But boy, that little boy in my house, he would have had his finger slapped for sure. At work, maybe this looks like where you work right now. You get the cubicle drama, and a lot of people just aren't talking. You know, when we cease to stop communicating, we cease to be effective. And there is a reason for Agile and its principles. Although this is not an Agile presentation, but I will say that Agile does have some benefits. But even within Agile and being co-located and having a more open environment, crucial conversations have to happen more often, not less, in order for us all to work together. And that's really where we want to get to. So I want to give you a little test, and I want you to look at the items that come up on the next slide, and I want you to mentally check which box you fall into. You might fall into multiple boxes, and maybe you don't fall into any, but I'm betting you fall into at least one. Let's look at the first one. Check this box if you're someone that avoids conflict regularly. You know who you are out there. You're the person, as soon as you see two people fighting, you kind of like make an excuse to go to the bathroom, or you start doodling and you don't pay attention to what's going on. So check the box if you're that kind of person. Let's see, check the box if you've been bullied in your life. I have no shame in admitting that I was heavily bullied as a child. I was the fat nerd that no one liked, and I was bullied quite a bit, so that's definitely a box for me. Check the box if you've not been able to reach your boss. Now what I mean by this is when you've had a great idea and the boss isn't listening to you, you just can't find a way to reach them, they keep shutting you down. Those kind of scenarios. Have you been there before? I certainly have. Check this box if you've had one of those holidays. Now, most of us have gotten through our holiday seasons, and most of us have had one of those holidays where the family doesn't get along. A lot of great movies out there on that. And then check this box if you know you haven't had a perfect life. And so at this point, everyone should have checked a box somewhere, because I don't think there's anyone that's had a perfect life and has never been in one of these situations. And I'm leading up to why. Having said that, I'm going to give you one more box that you could check. You can check this box if you have always, and I do mean always, been successful at having difficult conversations and getting your desired results. And if that's the case, at this point, I will turn over the webinar to whoever that is, and I will leave for the day, and you can teach the rest of it. This doesn't exist, and no one is in that position. More than likely, if you feel that maybe you've been pretty successful, maybe you've avoided some of the conversations you need to have. And that's the key here. If we want to be successful at work and home, we need to have more crucial conversations to be effective. All right, let's look at some of the research. You know, there's been over 25 years of research, and 100,000 people have been interviewed. And this research has told us that the most effective leaders are the ones that skillfully address risky political and emotional issues. I will say that again. They skillfully address risky political and emotional issues. In other words, they're having crucial conversations. These are the people that can do it in a way that everyone feels comfortable with at the end. These are the people that end up being the leaders we look to. Now, the importance to you as a business analyst, project manager, quality assurance, PMBA, Pumbaa, Pumbaka, if you're a hybrid of all three, whatever you are in your role, is that Forrester and Gardner said the future leaders of America are going to be people grounded in business analysis. In other words, the future presidents of your country are out there right now on this webinar. And you are going to be the person that can skillfully address these things on your projects. And the better you get at it, the better you have these crucial conversations, the stronger leader you're going to be. And I'm not talking about just being a leader of people. I'm talking about leading within your domain of business analysis or the role you're in, and owning it, and being able to remove conflict and head off the emotional problems and other things that happen on your projects. And yes, that's actually your responsibility. What we shouldn't be doing as BAs is just constantly escalating and handing it off to other people. We need to own our stuff. We need to own our skills. So the research proves that out. Now let's look at some definitions, and I'll get to the 5 concepts in a little bit, but we're just going to keep talking about around the periphery of some of the things that we need to make sure we understand about crucial conversations. So the dictionary says crucial means decisive or critical, especially in the success or failure of something. Makes sense. And a conversation is informal exchange of ideas or spoken words. And of course the dictionary says 2 men were deep in conversation. I think we can just say 2 people and make it equal. And in those definitions, there's a fantastic book out there called Crucial Conversations. And in that book, they define crucial conversations as a discussion between 2 or more people where 1, stakes are high, and 2, opinions vary, and 3, emotions run strong. Now, I think the book's great, but when it comes to business analysis, project management, when it comes to projects, I think this definition is not strong enough. And I have a different definition, and this definition has come out of my 30 years experience based on influencing and dealing with people in difficult situations. So my definition is a strategic approach to having a discussion between 2 or more people where the stakes are high and strong opinions and emotions influence the outcome. Now, I hope that makes sense to you, and I want to point out a couple of things here. It's one thing to have the discussion when these things are happening, but it's the goal-oriented opportunity that we have to make sure that it ends well. In other words, it must be strategic. And strategy plays a large part of having a crucial conversation. Most of us are not naturally strategic. And if I did a survey right now to find out how many people of the current 750 people that are on this webinar, which is phenomenal, by the way, thank you all for showing up, I would bet that less than 1% of you would admit that you are strategic by nature. That's pretty standard. Now, most people have to work at being strategic, and so if you're going to be successful at having a crucial conversation, you're going to need to lean sometimes on other people to help you formulate a strategy for the conversation that you need to have. And I'm actually naturally strategic. It's my second skill. I still lean on other people to make sure that the strategy is solid, because if I don't have a solid strategy for the conversation, it's going to fail. And the other thing is pointing out that it's influencing the outcome. The whole point of having this conversation is to influence it to a positive resolution. So very important concepts right off the bat in what a crucial conversation really is. Strategic influence when things are on the line. All right? So there are lots of conversations, and I just want to make sure that everyone understands that these are the kinds of conversations you should be having at home regularly, and I'll go over the ones at work. But if these things are happening at home, you've got to have conversations about them. Otherwise, we are putting ourselves in a position for our relationships to break down. So even if it's the typical, the older brother bullies the younger sister, someone needs to have a conversation. If it's the constant kid who does not listen, and I bet you there's a few hundred people online right now who have that happening in their house, I definitely can relate. I have a couple of godnieces right now who probably need a crucial conversation. But all of these things are reasons to have conversations. You cannot avoid them. When we avoid them, these things start to build up like a tiny little fire, and they get out of control eventually, and someone gets burned. So it's not healthy. So I want you to recognize not only these situations, but all the other types of situations at home. Everything needs a conversation to resolve it. Work also has things that need to be discussed, and you can't let these things go. Now, have you worked with someone where they cross the line again and again and again, and they might still be doing it, and everyone's completely ignored them for months, letting them do this? Really bad thing to do. We can't let them get away with that because we're instilling bad behavior. Has anyone ever had to critique a colleague and it didn't go well? Well, this is where that strategy comes in. Notice the bullies happen at work now too. Paul Peltier is an amazing speaker and colleague and friend of mine who talks about bullying in the workplace. He's got some great information about how to combat that. But foundationally, we're talking about crucial conversations here. The unaccountable team member, the one that shows up who doesn't feel they have to work, we must address these things. Has anyone ever had to tell their boss they're not a good boss? I have, and it was not a comfortable conversation. So, but again, these are things in your environment that you have to address, whether you're giving or receiving an unfavorable performance review. And when we talk about crucial conversations, we're not just talking about addressing someone and saying, hey, you suck. That doesn't work. That's not what I want you to do. I want you to learn how to address the situation appropriately and foundationally in a way that will get good results. Okay. So what I would like you to do is look around the workplace. If you're in an environment where you can see a whole bunch of people right now, that's awesome. And if you're not, think about a time when you can just sit around, or imagine like when you've been in the lunchroom, or even if you've been in a mall or a party, and just think about looking at everyone. Look at their faces and look at them for 15 seconds. And when you look at all these people, do you see a problem? Do you see something specifically that is a problem? And there is a common problem with all of it. And the problem is actually us. Because most of us do not address the issues, all these things I just talked about, and we let bad behavior rule us. And when bad behavior rules us, we get less than desirable results. And it is pretty common that people will come up to me when I'm consulting or I'm at a conference, and they will talk to me about the person where they've let the bad behavior run for so long, and now they're trying to dig their way out of it. And the problem is, because they didn't address it early on, then it becomes something that's allowable, and in some cases, from an HR perspective, you're never going to be able to dig out of it. And now you've got that person that has had 5, 10, 15, 20 years of bad behavior that you have to fight. And that's not comfortable. So the problem is us. We can't let the bad behaviors rule us. We must find a way of addressing those bad behaviors up front. Now, to give you a flavor before I even get into the model of the critical concepts, I have had a lot of difficult conversations, and I want to tell you a few stories about some of them. So, for example, I've had to have the conversation about employee hygiene. Now, maybe you've had this at your work before. It's not comfortable. It's very awkward indeed. I had a situation where some of my employees thought it was great to spray Lysol in the cube of an employee that they felt had incredibly bad hygiene and stunk all the time. And everything works out great up until someone sprays Lysol while the person's in the cube. That's right, you heard me. They sprayed it while they were in the cube, and then everything went to HR after that. So here's the thing. We let bad behavior rule us, and I was unaware of it, and people should have come to me so I could have addressed it sooner. Sometimes the crucial conversation is reaching out to the right person. So there are channels of crucial conversations that can happen as well. I've had probably like 25, 30 conversations on requirements debacles. I can't go through all those stories, but the reality is BAs get blamed a lot for projects that fail, and they blame it on the requirements. And in most cases, it's actually not. So you need to have more conversations up front. Let's see, I've had conversations about the employees hooking up. Awesome. Not. And by the way, that's happened more than once. Scary stuff. Not at work, please. Power plays. Has anyone ever had to make a power play before? This is key. A lot of people think crucial conversations are just for, dealing with behavior that's going bad. But actually, crucial conversations can be things for positive outcomes and where it's going to go. And I have made several power plays. Now, power plays, often people think they're negative. They're not. They are strategic meetings and situations to drive higher results that you can benefit from. So if you haven't been promoted on time, or things are lagging, or you want to move to another level, it might be time to make the power play. Having said that, it's very strategic. You don't do it well, you may not get the results you like, and you have to live by those results. Let's see. Oh, I also had to have the conversation of I will kill you all in your sleep. Now, you're probably wondering, what? I'm sure there's a few people right now who were multitasking, looking at another screen, and they heard I will kill you all in your sleep, and their head just snapped back. This was actually my sister. She was living with my brother and mother, and she threatened to kill us all in our sleep. So the crucial conversation on this one was easy. Get out. There's one in every family, sadly. And I wish I had better news about that, but it is very sad. I don't know where she lives. I don't know where she's at, and the conversations didn't happen soon enough to deal with that. So, and of course, there's always that one time at band camp. If anyone's had that moment, the conversation that you've had at band camp, awesome. Moving on. So I did say PG-13. That's as far as we're taking that one. All right, let's talk about crucial conversations and types. You need to start recognizing the types of conversations that exist or have the potential to exist in order for you to be strategic. So the first type is content. Now, content conversations happen one time. So in other words, let's say John, hypothetically here, in quotes, has done something and no one really likes what he did. And for any Johns online today, I apologize, not picking on you personally. But John's done something, but it was a one-time thing. And so you have to recognize, is this something I want to address or not? Now, in most cases, people are going to say, no, it was a one-time thing. I'll ignore it because it won't happen again. I'm going to disagree with that a little bit because my experience tells me that this was a one-time thing, but it's going to turn into other one-time things. This becomes permission to do things that most people find unacceptable, and people push the boundaries. Now, I'm all about pushing the boundaries. I am known as the badass business analyst. That's my moniker in the industry. I push the envelope. I don't take no for an answer. But I also know how to communicate to get there. So one-time issues probably just aren't going to be as big of a conversation or as serious, but I think they still need to be addressed. You also have patterns. Patterns are where they're happening repeatedly. And they're happening on a repeated basis, more than likely because someone's ignorant of the law or ignorant of the golden rule or ignorant of the ground rules that were laid. or they just haven't had enough experience to know that maybe this isn't what should be happening. And, you know, it takes a while to gather that wisdom. So these are things that need to be addressed as well, and we need to be strategic about how we show people the repeated incident and how to correct it. So two different ways. The other type is the relationship. And this is where you're questioning the intent of what they did. In other words, there is a feeling or suspicion that they are out to harm you or harm people in some fashion. Now, in some cases, some people do not recognize that there is harm coming from this, but it's still something you need to address to get to the root cause of it and figure it out. So as you start analyzing the people you work with and your home life, please start looking for these things and decide how you're going to address them. Was it one time? Was it repeated? And was it something that it was relationship-based and the intent came out in question? All of these require crucial conversations. The level of the crucial conversation is going to be different. One time is much easier than relationship. Those are the hardest. And that makes sense, right? Especially what if you've had a relationship with someone for 10 years or longer? And how do you deal with that? So not going to be easy as these types get more complicated. Now, there's all sorts of crucial conversation people. Not all sorts, there's really 3 types. But I want to go through them. So the first type, and these are the people that you have to have crucial conversations with, are resistors. The resistors are people that immediately do not agree with whatever you say. They just don't care. They think whatever you're talking about is stupid. I have no sense of wanting to deal with you. You're an idiot. Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. That's the way it's going to be treated. And a lot of this comes into is that they don't have any WIFM factor in it. In other words, they don't know what's in it for me. That's what WIFM stands for. And the what's in it for me, if it's not in it for them, they're going to resist whatever it is you want to talk about. So strategically, when you're working with people and you want to have a crucial conversation with them, you need to analyze them to the point where you know their WIFM factor. The next type are the compliance. The compliance are the people that do the bare minimum. These are the people that, from a survivor perspective, outwit, outlast, outplay. They're all wait and see. You know what, I'll just do this much and maybe he or she will go away. They're very neutral about everything. They're like, maybe, could, sure, probably, I don't know. And they will drive you insane. At least they drive me insane. The last type are the engagers, and the engagers are the people, in some cases they're like puppy dogs. They're like, yes, yes, let's do it. Let's talk about it. I want to learn. I want feedback. And those people are really easy to deal with if maybe sometimes overzealous in their approach. Having said that, the hardest of these 3 people to deal with are the compliance because they do the minimum. And you never really know what side they're going to fall on. With the resistors, there's a clear strategy. With the engagers, there's a clear strategy. With the compliance, it becomes more complex. And I would definitely be engaging other people strategically when analyzing people about how to have a conversation with whatever it is you need. All right? Now, let's get into the 5 critical concepts to help everyone discuss what really matters most. So we've gotten the overview out of the way. Now I'm going to give you the 5 tips that will actually help you have a better conversation. Please do not forget to send in any questions you have about crucial conversations. Deb will take them at the end, and we will get them answered either online or offline if there are a lot of questions. Anything is fair game, by the way, in Bob the BA world, so feel free to ask. All right, so let's talk about the first critical concept, and that's a roadblock. You can't have a conversation when roadblocks exist. So the first thing you need to do is actually recognize the roadblock and the size of the roadblock. This is just like being on any good project, folks. You need to recognize what's in your way, what are your barriers and how to remove it. This is a pretty big roadblock that we're seeing on the screen here. This isn't going to just be you removing it. This is going to require an entire team. So you cannot have a conversation until you've made sure that any barriers or roadblocks have been removed in order to have the conversation. Now, with that roadblock, usually what happens is people start to get stressed. And you can't have the conversation when you're stressed. These things go poorly. So I would like everyone to go into their imaginations right now and pretend you're blowing up a balloon. Okay? Just play along with me here. If we were live together, we would do this with real balloons, and everyone would have a balloon and blow up their balloon together. But in this case, I want you to take an imaginary balloon, and I want you to blow it up to the level of stress that you think you have in your life. So this is fairly normal stress that you can see on the screen here that we can deal with. And we graduate to larger amounts of stress, and eventually this might be the most stressed. And when I do this live and in person, there's usually a good 10, 15 people that have balloons this big or bigger. And I want you to imagine the size of the balloon, and I want you to understand your stress level, but you've got to let it go. We tend to stress and obsess about too much, and when we do, we're not able to have the conversation. It fails almost all the time. Emotion comes out, we get hot-headed, we start creating things that don't exist, and we've got to stay, true to the facts. So what I want you to just imagine right now is take that balloon, put it over your head, and then just let it go. Let it blow out and go away from your head and remove the stress. And anytime you need a stress reliever, this actually works pretty well. Get a real balloon, fill it up, imagine it's your stress, and then just say, you know what, when you let the balloon go and let it fly off into the room, you have no more stress. But a key concept here with roadblocks is that you must remove the stress to deal with the conversation. And I know from experience that when I've been stressed, I don't look comfortable, my face gets flushed, and of the 772 people that are out there, I'm betting 350 of them all have flushing problems like myself, where your chest gets flushed, your arms, or your face when you get stressed or angry. So you got to learn to let it go. I will not sing Frozen at this point. Let it go. But I'm tempted. But you got to learn to let it go. Now, if you can't figure out it, your balloon is going to get so big that honestly you are going to be the person that's going to be in trouble, and people are going to have crucial conversations with you about your stress levels and not being able to manage it. So constantly work on managing the stress, because the number of conversations that you need to have are a lot. Now, if you can't figure out why you're so stressed, if you can't figure out what the roadblocks are, you need to go to BA 101 and do some root cause analysis. Whether you're going to do the Ishikawa, the fishbone diagram, or you're going to do the 5 whys, bounce it off of someone that you work with, but get to the root cause. You cannot have a crucial conversation without understanding the root cause for behavior, both yours and theirs, for the roadblock and for the stress. I hope this makes sense to everyone. You just need to have it grounded in a good foundational knowledge. Now the next concept is Charlie Brown. All right? And what it's about is conviction. So if you've never seen Charlie Brown before, please go back and see these. But for everyone else that's seen Charlie Brown, every time there was a cartoon, he had this thing where Lucy would hold the football, and she'd be like, come on, Chuck, knock it out of the park. And he would run at the ball, and she would pull the ball at the last second, and he would miss every time. But Charlie Brown had a level of conviction that most people do not. And it's pretty important to understand that if you want to have a successful result for your crucial conversation, you've got to have conviction. You've got to have determination, stick-to-itiveness to carry it through. If you don't care about it enough, then the conversation's never going to end well. So I want you to think about what is your level of conviction. And just as a quick side note, if we think about conviction a different way, do you remember Gilligan's Island? All right, Gilligan's Island, where they're all trapped on the island. Did any of them actually want to get off the island? No, they did not. I mean, Gilligan wasn't going to leave the island because he finally had friends. The skipper couldn't leave the island because he'd be arrested for crashing them. Ginger, what was she doing on a boat with 7 people? She had a washed-up career, that's why. So she didn't want to leave because she had an audience to perform to. Professor wasn't going to leave because he was building, like amazing gadgets. And if he left, he'd have to go back and teach 5th graders how to build potato clocks. That wasn't going to work. Marianne wasn't going to leave because she wanted the professor, so wherever the professor went, she was going to stay. And let's see who's left. The Howells. Come on. The Howells. The Howells are clearly drug runners. Please tell me how two incredibly rich people are on a yacht with 7 strangers. They were running from the law. That's why the Howells were on that island. So otherwise they'd be on their own yacht. I think I just summed up everything about Gilligan's Island you ever need to know. You won't look at it the same way again. So conviction, none of them wanted to leave the island. Do you want to leave the island? Do you want to have the conversation? Now, I have had conversations that I did not have, and I don't live with regrets. I didn't have a conversation with the person who called me an idiot in front of 75 people where senior management was present and literally halfway through my presentation stood up and said, "You're an idiot." Now, I handled it well, and I said, "Thank you for the feedback. We'll take that offline. And for now, we're going to continue on with our agenda." Good facilitation skills, awesome. But by not having the conversation with that person on why this was not appropriate, it led to 2 years of fighting, basically, and it took a very long time to resolve. You have to address the behavior right off the bat. I didn't have a conversation with the guy at prom that basically stole my girlfriend, and I got dumped, and I was trapped in an all-night party all night long. That was awesome. It wasn't awesome at all. It was very tragic. It was one of those prom stories right out of, like, Pretty in Pink and movies like that. I never had the conversation with my grandmother, Lois. Lois, you know how you have a grandmother, and grandmothers are supposed to be really sweet and nice? I had 2 grandmothers. One was lovely and sadly died at a young age of cancer. And the other one, yeah, I don't think she really liked me. She kept, treating me like I was a girl, spelled my name B-O-B-B-I-E until I was 21. And she would go out of her way to kind of, point out all the things that were wrong. So I should have had a conversation with her, but I didn't because, it's grandma. I didn't have a conversation, and I wouldn't have when I was in 2nd grade with little Helen. I grew up very poor, and I had hand-me-down white T-shirts. That's what I wore to school, and she would give me no grief about it because she was in her little fashionista outfit. And one day I couldn't take it anymore, and I swore at her. And when you're in 2nd grade, you don't know what these words are. I learned them from, obviously, older siblings. Imagine when I say, "Helen, you're a bleep," and the entire playground disappears. I was left alone, standing alone. And then, of course, the principal came and got me, took me to the boys' bathroom, took 2 large paper towels, filled them with liquid pink soap, put them in my mouth, and marched me up and down the school. Now, if my parents had known that that had happened, but of course they did not believe it happened, they would have had a conversation with the principal. In this day and age, these people would get fired for something like that. But when I grew up, that was not the case. Wish I had had the conversation at graduation when someone in the audience, when I went up and I'm grabbing my diploma, screamed out "fag" in front of 2,000 people with my parents in the audience, and that eventually got me kicked out of the house. Awesome. So you can't live with regrets is part of what I'm going to say about conversations. And of course, on a more positive note, there was that other time at band camp. But I don't want you to live with regrets, but I do want you to think about it when something happens that's fairly traumatic. You need to address it and have the conversation. Your life will be better if you have it. All right, so Steve Jobs said, "Your time is limited. So don't waste it by living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of other people's opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition." And given all that, what I'm really trying to say is have enough courage to have the conversation because you really don't know how long people are going to be on this earth. And as I get older and I start seeing, colleagues and other people dropping like flies at ages where we thought, well, that's too young to die. These things start settling in. So make sure you're having your conversations regularly, frequently. Now, when should you have the conversation? This is really key, folks. And you need to look both ways. So cutest picture ever with our little meerkats, right? Looking both ways. So the first way you need to look is, when should you have a conversation? And I want you to really be analyzing people. When you see someone being silent repeatedly, someone avoids the issues, maybe they're just a little emotionally jittery, or they're a control freak, they're attacking, they withdraw, all of these things, these are all signs that you should have a conversation with them before it becomes an issue. Now, there's a distinct difference between what I've got on the screen here and the next screen, where I'm saying you probably shouldn't have the conversation because the timing is bad. And this is what these two slides are really all about. It's about timing. Now, if someone's moved into attack mode right off the bat, you've got to have that conversation now. If someone is constantly avoiding the issues, you've got to have that conversation now, because it's building up. And by letting it build up, the behavior is going to get so bad it's going to turn into a big blow up. So these are definitely times to have the conversation. Having said that, these are not the times to have the conversation. And people that are jumpy or nervous are different than the previous slide. These are people that might become emotional too quickly. People that are hesitant, like, see, there's something on their mind that they don't want to say right now, and if you press them, that might actually set them off. So what you need to do is figure out how you can figure out in these situations when you should and should not have these conversations. Now, you will notice that emotion appeared on both screens. It's hard to tell you which emotions come up where you should and should not have the conversation. What I want you to be aware of is that it's there, and you need to start probing gently to figure out if it's a time to have the conversation. You have the conversation at the wrong time, you are going to end up in a disaster, and that's exactly what this is going to look like. So I was being pressed for some information, and I was telling a person, you know, I don't want to talk about this right now. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And I kept getting pressed and pressed and pressed. And finally, I got pressed to the point, because they weren't recognizing that this was not the time to have the conversation. I screamed out, because I don't like you. Now you know why. Oh, see, even Bob, with his 30 years experience, can be pushed to the breaking point. We all can. It's just human nature. And so, you know, as much as you can tell someone I'm not ready, you've got to rely on the other person for recognizing, hey, when I said I'm not ready, don't. Now, having said that, you need to make sure that you follow through. So I'll give you a hypothetical situation. You go up to someone and you say, hey, I want to have a conversation with you about it. Let's have, you know, this, I wouldn't label it crucial conversation, but because that's a tip-off, right? But I want to talk to you about something. And they say, I'm not ready. Great, no problem. Don't say anything. Just say, okay, no problem. I'll reach out to you later, and leave it at that. In a few days or weeks or whatever you think the good time frame is, then go back and see if they're ready. And if they say they're not ready again, now you have to go a little deeper. And you have to be willing to say, well, when will you be ready? And you need to get a date from them. And if they don't want to give you a date, at some point you will have to press for it. But it is very important that you get a date, because it's going to lead into step number 5, which I'll give you here in just a minute. So don't be afraid to ask, but if they're not ready, back off. But then you've got to eventually get that date so that you have something to work with. And while you're doing all of this, you have to be a storyteller. Now, storytelling is something that often people think, well, why do I need to tell a story? Because stories are what keep people wrapped up in the conversation. Stories are what keep people from moving to other things. You need to use all of your storytelling techniques to make sure that the conversation is moving in the direction it needs to. You need to make sure that you understand the roles, the rationale, that you yourself can be unemotional as appropriate. Now, there will be times where it's okay for you to be emotional because it's natural, but for the most part, these things need to start off unemotional, and I mean from, you know, the anger and all that other stuff, so that you can get to the root. Make sure you don't play the victim and all of a sudden get wrapped up in their world. This is something I struggle with, Stockholm Syndrome, right? So all of a sudden we start believing it their way. You do need to understand their view. You do need to make sure that you're telling a story, though, and make sure you're using all five senses. Now, all five senses is one very simple thing that most people know as common sense. Common sense is derived by using all five senses, and a storyteller will make sure that people hear it and see it, and all of it. It's using everything at your disposal to do so. And as a storyteller, it's important because our communications keep changing. And this is one of the big struggles for business analysts especially. We have to constantly analyze people and change their communication methods to be effective. I mean, we look at our world of emoticons. There are literally people that send me text all the time in these emoticons, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, and I'm trying to decipher it all the time. And between the emoticons, and then I've got all the acronyms. And it's kind of like, and this is a test. You guys can take this as a little test later, write all these down, see how many you know. I will give you one that's for every parent online today. AITR, because if your kid has that on your phone, you should be nervous. It stands for Adult in the Room. And that means they were talking about something they did not want you to hear. Trust is what it is. I leave that up to you guys, but a storyteller has to be aware of telling the story in a lot of different ways and responding a lot of different ways. So at the end of the day, we're talking about communication skills. Who's supposed to be better at communication than anyone else on our projects? The business analyst. And at the end of the day, a storyteller and a business analyst is going to make sure that they use every skill at their disposal. And that includes things like asking questions, which we know we all have to do, creating a safe environment, listening, paraphrasing, mirroring as concepts. But please, please, please have empathy with the situation, because without empathy, you're not having a crucial conversation. It's a one-way, my way, or the highway type of conversation, and honestly, that gets you into trouble. So think about your storytelling, and when you're done with the storytelling then, this goes back to that disaster that I had. You need to make sure that you hold people accountable. There's no magic bullet here other than hold people accountable to what's being done. We need to have a conversation. When are we going to have it? Why are we having it? Why do we need to have it? When do we need to have it? How are we going to have it? Who's involved? Who, what, where, why, when, how? Accountability is key because it's about making sure people have the context for the situation of why we need to do it. So remove your roadblocks. Get the stress level out there. Remove the stress. Make sure that you've got the right level of conviction. Make sure that you understand when and when not to have the conversation. Make sure that you're telling the story and communicating effectively and hold people accountable as a model at the highest level. That's a pretty good start. Now, there's a few more things that you've got to be aware of. Not all crucial conversations, not all of them, should be had. And it's okay to say, you know what, I need to walk away from that. Maybe I shouldn't have that. Maybe you didn't have permission. That happened to me. I was given permission to have a crucial conversation with someone, and the boss and the employee and everyone was on board, and it went off really, really well. And a couple months later, I thought I'd have another crucial conversation with the employee. And I decided to go there, and the employee was so offended, they took it to their manager, and HR got involved. Just because you had permission once to have the conversation doesn't mean you have permission twice. My bad, I should have been more thoughtful and talked to them about whether or not it was okay to have this with them. The relationship was repaired, but it definitely strained it. And you would think that once you've done it, it's okay. You should be able to do this all the time. It's not. These are very situational. So be careful. Not all crucial conversations can be had. Like, I would have loved to have had a crucial conversation with my aunt many, many, many years ago, but this was before we had, social media and everything else and letter writing. And She went through an incredibly difficult situation that we need about 10 minutes to tell the full story. But suffice it to say, for a year I had a serial killer uncle. that's the story I'm leaving you with on that one. And everyone, I think, ends up with one in their family at some point, but only for a year. So timing matters in conversations, right? And not all crucial conversations work. And that's one of the things that the crucial and critical conversation books that exist out there usually don't describe or talk about. Let's face it, not everything can be resolved. You have to make a judgment call, and you have to be strategic about it, which is why I do think you need to have some confidants on your side and talk to them about, this is what I'd like to do. Do you think it will work? Let's look at the person. Be careful of who you put your trust in, though, because if this gets out, it could turn against you. And then the crucial conversation is going to be with you, not the other way around. So you've got to be careful on crucial conversations. When can you have them? Should you have them? And not every single one of them are going to work, and maybe it's okay sometimes to just walk away. Having said that, I firmly believe that there's always room to be a better person in life. I think that's what it means to be a badass business analyst. It's not about having a Harley. It's not about having tattoos or, the most money. It's about having an ethical threshold that you constantly meet. It's about having a strong ethical and moral compass that guides you to do the right things. And I think that when badass BAs have crucial conversations, you are always going to be a better person. All right, so that's what I had to share today without the hoopla from the BBC where we had fireworks and singing and stuff like that. And we want to open it up for questions. Any question is fair game. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, my friend, and let's see what kind of questions we get from folks. Don't be shy. Any question at all.
Absolutely. Bob, I have to say you were quite an engaging storyteller, and it comes with some of the questions that we do have today. And the first question I have, can I bring you back to the beginning of your presentation when you were talking about the definition of crucial conversations, and it's actually your definition where you include the strategic approach. So when you're thinking about being strategic, does that sometimes border on people thinking that it's more manipulative as opposed to being honest about having that conversation when you have a strategic focus to it?
Yeah, so that's a question that I get asked a lot, and it comes down to understanding influence without authority at its deepest levels. And so what's interesting about influence, all right, and everyone needs to influence in their BA roles, is that manipulation and persuasion are actually subsets of influence, and it's how you choose to use them. So influence is the concept that, I'm going to try and influence you to do the right thing, and if you, I want to do everything I can to get you on board, and if you don't go my way, I'm okay with that. I've tried to influence you, I just want to do the right thing, and if you go in another direction, no big deal, no harm, no foul. Persuasion doesn't do that. Persuasion is I'm going to be very adamant and I'm going to try and change your mind. It's a subset of influence. It's riskier to use, and you've got to be careful with that. And manipulation, usually people think of it as a negative and that it's treating someone in an unfair, unethical manner. Having said that, that's a very classic, old definition, very old school. Modern definitions of manipulation is that there are positive aspects of manipulation because we're trying to do the right thing for people. So when you think of, your boss says, hey, I've got an opportunity for you, they're manipulating you. They're manipulating you for your growth, your opportunities to stretch, same with personal trainers and things of that nature. So understanding those finite differences, you have a choice about how far you want to take it. At the end of the day, I think you always have to be okay with the fact that if they don't agree and want to go in another direction, then you've got to be okay with that. That's their choice. Does that make sense?
Excellent. It does. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You bet.
So crucial conversations, they're really, really hard, and not everyone wants to engage in that kind of conversation. So what if someone goes up to you and says, can you have that crucial conversation on my behalf? Do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah. So a proxy, which is what we're talking about here, and proxies happen in everything we do. I mean, you look at Agile as a methodology, and BAs are having to be proxy product owners and Scrum Masters all the time. How well do those go? A BA never has enough authority as a product owner proxy, or they maybe don't have the necessary skills when they're doing proxy project management. It can be a similar thing. If the person that is doing it on your behalf does not have all the intimate knowledge, it could actually go the opposite way. Certainly there are people that are brought in as mediator, negotiator, facilitators who know how to be, perfectly third-party neutral in any situation and drive results, and that's great. But even they fail if they don't have the intimate knowledge. If it's that uncomfortable, it's perfectly okay to say start that way, but it can't be the whole conversation. You have to be involved at some point, but maybe things are so contentious that you have to start there, and I'm okay with that. I just don't think it should be a regular thing. Everyone needs to learn to have these conversations for themselves.
Excellent, thank you. So we talked a little bit about bad behavior. Sometimes the bad behavior is with a colleague, it could be with a boss, but what if it's with a customer? Do you have any guidance on how to best deal with bad behavior from a customer?
Yeah, so, it goes back to the old adage, the customer is always right. And they are, until proven wrong. Um, so I guess my best advice in dealing with customers is always take the high road first and let them, go the direction they are. Especially since most conversations with customers tend to be in very public environments, especially in that setting. Don't call them out because you would potentially demean them or their power base or their credibility by doing so. But what you're going to have to do then is have a private conversation with them to get them to understand how to communicate better so that you're on the same page. I had a customer once that pretty much every other word they dropped was the F-bomb. And it made so many people uncomfortable, it was really hard to work with, and then no one started showing up to the meetings because they just didn't want to hear it all the time. I couldn't call them out in the meeting because they were like, well, that's just how they speak, but I did have to have a conversation with them separately. High road first, don't do it public, do it private, and be very strategic, and you have to show them how it's going to benefit both of you to change the behavior.
Okay, good. So what about sometimes you have to communicate with people that may not take you seriously or they turn what you say into a joke. How do you get your message across so that you can get that good result that you're looking for, but you're dealing with that kind of resistor?
Yeah, so resistors come in so many shapes or sizes, and BAs all have to deal with these types of situations, and it depends on where you're at in your career, and especially if you're like the junior BA or you're the regular BA trying to move to the higher level, and the senior people don't really take you seriously. Sometimes what comes out of our mouth because of the way the relationships have been formed, especially if you're seen as a jovial person or someone that maybe hasn't had a lot of ideas to date, people will put you in a certain stereotype, all right? And stereotype's bad. The way to get out of that is that you have to show value differently than by speaking. You have to show it through graphs, charts, facts, models. You have to bring something else to the table that forces them to recognize you're a force to be reckoned with. People will take you, it's like the boy who cried wolf, right? He said it, and so everyone just ignored him after that because it's only speaking. If he really needed people to believe him the next time that it was going to be a problem, you need to bring some physical evidence. This gets back to that, using all 5 senses things. When people stop listening, because that's all they're used to, you have to bring something visual, something kinesthetic, tangible, bring something else to the table to combat that.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question, and it's about storytelling. And what you did in this presentation, telling your stories, engaging people, getting them to understand the concepts through storytelling, is an amazing skill that many, many people don't currently have and need to develop. Can you tell us how you actually develop those kinds of skills?
Sure. So I'm looking over at my library here in my office, and there's a book called The Story Theater Method. So, you know, books are always good. For me, I have a little bit of an advantage because I do have a theater music background. So I was forced to learn how to do stories because I would do things like dramatic interp, and I would actually take children's stories and I would have to tell them in a different way. And in some cases, you would be given a title and you have to make up a story. So when you put yourself in that position repeatedly again and again and again, you start learning all the tricks of what makes up a good story. Having said that, there's a lot of great books out there on how to tell stories, and I think that would be the best place to start, and or maybe I should do another webinar at some point on storytelling.
I was just thinking that. That would be great. But we do have to go. It's just after 2, and we have to let everyone go. Thank you very much for joining us. And Bob, thank you very much for your presentation today. We do still have some questions that we didn't get a chance to ask. So Bob is right. I will send these questions to Bob. He will respond to them. And then we will attach them to the archived webinar so that you can have access to it and be able to look through the questions that were posed by your peers and colleagues. So with that, thank you to everyone, and have a great rest of the day. Bye
Awesome.
for now.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, Bob.